most pastors that I think are unqualified are probably going to speak to you truths that are going to kill you. And what I mean by that is some will lead you into heresy, and usually heretics are viewed, you'll see them by their character, false prophets. But false prophets also don't teach you the whole counsel of God. They only teach you certain parts that you're in agreement with, and they kill you slowly by not growing you. If you don't deal with it in your household, that sin, by either putting it out or putting that person out, cutting off fellowship from them, putting them on church discipline, then you don't belong in the church of God. Here's another one, right? So gentle, you're not harsh in the way you speak. Like, that's not what this means. Like even here, peaceable, it needs to be understood. So the macos and the mac type root is talking about fighting and making war, like physical fighting. And so amakos is the negation of that, meaning that he's not to be someone who's a brawler. He's not to be someone who gets in physical fights. Is that actually it should be not if they don't meet any of these. If they don't meet one of them, they're not qualified. Too many times people think this is a list to choose from. And as long as he's qualified, in most of these or the ones I think are important, then I'll go. Again, that's making your own list.
Yeah.
This is the list we're given. Titus is the list we're given. 1 Peter 5 is the list we're given. These are the things we're given that show maturity. And if they lack these things, again, as a pattern or in an egregious way where they sin and break these things, they're not qualified in any of them.
Oh yeah, well, it's not very often that a cantina has a part 2 to like, a drink special. Like, hey, unless it's like weekly, I guess, we do happy hour. Maybe we can consider this happy hour part 2 because we're going into the qualifications of elders part 2. So if you enjoyed the first one, well, welcome back. Take a seat, grab a drink. I got my Waterloo. If you're looking for a really good sparkling water, like actually tastes like it says, Waterloo's the best. And
Waterloo at a grocery store near you.
They have an all-day rosé that's really good.
Oh, yeah. I mean, LaCroix, it's got like like some of the flavoring is like cockroach repellent stuff. Anyway, don't get LaCroix. Get Waterloo. And that's where Napoleon.
We better get some money out of this, but
yeah, well, they better sponsor us. And like I said, Napoleon was defeated there. So anyway, yeah, so we're going to talk about qualifications. Last time we kind of I don't know, defined the present day understanding of qualifications, right? So misunderstandings. What does the culture say about how a pastor is qualified? So we harped on that. And then tonight, we're going to look at the actual text. We're going to look at 1 Timothy 3, Titus. We might look at 1 Peter as well, but that's where we're going to start. So do we want to start in 1 Timothy 3?
Yeah, let's do that. That's kind of the longest one, right?
Yeah.
Let me back up here.
And the reason we wanted to look into the text is because some of the words that Paul uses, like sober or open-minded, we anachronistically attach meanings to those words that the readers of this text, or Timothy, let's just say when Timothy was reading this, he would have had a different understanding of what Paul was saying, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't. Do you want to just like read through it and kind of go through the each qualification, talk about it?
Sure. I do think it's interesting that, like, verse 1, like, pistos halagos. It's a good belief. It's like to believe the word if someone seeks episcopes, right? Being a pastor or bishop. I do interesting that he uses the word pistos. It's like it's a good belief. Like believe to desire this is a good thing, right?
Well, so pistos. So yeah, pistos would be like faithful, meaning like trustworthy,
right?
And so I think what Paul's saying is that you can actually rely on this list to give you a good sense of what Christian maturity looks like. And then he's going to say in verse 2 that actually it's a must. You have to actually reference this list. If you don't, you're going to be sinning because it's absolutely it's necessary. You have to do it.
So this
that's
is
what the
not
word
descriptive.
Yeah, it's not suggestive either. It's just absolutely you have to do this. This is required for elders. They must meet the standard of Christian maturity that this lays out, not what you think is mature, but what God thinks is mature as he lists these things. That's why it's so important to kind of understand, what these things are talking about.
Yeah, so because the English kind of comes off as like, use this if you want to. It's a good secondary thing to have in your pocket if you can't figure it out yourself or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It's more like, no, this is the list.
Yeah. So if anyone desires to be an episcopos, and already we have a question of like, what's an episcopos? An episcopos is actually a guardian.
Yeah, that's what I wrote in my notes as well, that it's in like a secular Greek context that would be used for someone who is like watching over the city gates.
Yeah.
Someone who is in like a watchman of whatever type, or a guardian.
Yeah. It's someone who basically watches. It's their responsibility to make sure that what needs to be done is actually done in the right way. So like it refers, in the Old Testament, the Septuagint refers to a priest that is assigned like the lighting of candles or whatever. And he has to actually make sure that's done in the right way. Here, obviously, it's to watch over the Church of God, to be a guardian of the Church of God. And we've talked many times about the fact that, well, what's a guardian? Well, it's a father. Mm-hmm. And so it's really his job to be a father over the household of God. And we'll see that a little bit later as well.
You see this in like Acts 20, right? Where Paul is giving the farewell speech and he's saying, to keep watch over the flock.
Yeah. But I think that's important because he's to be a parent, a guardian, not a buddy. He is to actually watch over. He's not just hanging out or whatever. And then of course, how does he watch over? He watches over it in terms of whether it's being discipled, because that's the job of the apostles that he takes over. So if anyone desires to be an episcopos, a guardian, he desires a good work. Therefore, the guardian must be above reproach. So above reproach just doesn't mean perfect. It just means that if you're going to stick him with some sort of sin, habitual sin, or egregious sin, it doesn't stick. So any sort of sin that you're trying to like put on him, it doesn't work. It's not talking about, well, he never sins. It just means any sort of either habitual sin that would show immaturity, or any sort of egregious sin, just even as a one-off, that would show immaturity. So I think that's kind of important to understand. People don't tend to get that. So he's to be above reproach, meaning that you can't make things stick when you're trying to.
Now, it's interesting because Paul's going to use the same word later in chapter 6:14 when he says, when he's finishing his letter and appealing to Timothy, he says, to obey this command above reproach or without fault or failure. until the appearing of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So even in that sense, like Christ is going to come and be like, did you do these things that you're commissioned to do? And he'll be found to do those. Yes, he did. Right. So like, it's the same idea. If someone brings accusations against you, you're going to be found out to be above that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it gives this common phrase, a one woman man, right? So most translations do a husband of one wife. That's not, I don't think that's very good, because in the Roman Empire, everybody's a husband of one wife, because polygamy is not allowed in the Greco-Roman period. They're a monogamous people. So now, monogamous as in you only officially have one wife. You can have a wife, though, and lots of women on the side. You can have a wife and go to prostitutes, and you can have a bunch of just people that you're not married to, and you just remain unmarried. That's what this is talking about. It's talking about you have more than one person that you are joined to at any given time, and therefore you are either qualified by being monogamous truly in your relationships, or you're not qualified if you're not. And so I think that's important. I would say it includes divorced people, because I think divorced and remarried people are the husbands of two wives. So I don't think divorced people are allowed. That's consistent with the Old Testament. The Old Testament does not allow priests, either the priest or the high priest, to marry a divorced woman, because they're not to join themselves with, I think, someone. Even then, God knows you're still joined to that person, and his priests are not to do it, even though he allows it in the general public.
So what does this say to a man who is not a virgin when he gets married?
I think for a man who's not a virgin when he gets married, he's committed adultery on his wife, but he's not necessarily still, like, he's not married to someone else in that regard. Whereas, so I would say,
is he a one woman man though?
Well, I think that you're looking at the picture of whether he's a one woman man right now.
Okay.
So I don't think this is talking about their whole lives, because this is, people in Ephesus, right? And a lot of them became Christians later. So almost none of the men.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of the women would be, but women can't be overseers, so it doesn't matter. But most of the men are not going to be virgins. So it's really an issue of, are they, I would say, when they become Christians, but especially when they are, around the time you're choosing them for elders, are they one woman men? And if they're not, then then they're not qualified. Now, I want to give a caveat. I think this is important. In one sense, no one's flesh is a one woman man, because you have a mind that's going to lust after other people. I don't think that this, just like law, is trying to deal with the inner person. Yes, I think that you can apply it if there's a habitual thing in terms of, let's say he lusts after other women, even though he's not physical with other women.
Or it's like a pornography addiction or something.
Or a pornography addiction or something. But that's not really what this is talking about, even though I would say, if it's habitual, you could apply it to that. But I would, the reason why I caution, because I literally think, just like women who want to divorce their husbands because they watch pornography, or they thought of a woman lustfully, and they admitted it to them, that's not really cause for divorce. Like, even if you believe that you get divorced on adultery, in the same way, no one would be qualified for ministry then. Nobody.
Yeah.
Because literally all men and all women have lusted after other people. And so it's really talking, it functions like the law. Is there some proof that you have that this person has joined themselves to another woman while they have this other woman? That's what one woman man means. That they don't have more than one woman joined to their flesh at this time. That they're currently pursuing that relationship. So I think that's what it's really talking about. Again, I think like all law, it's giving us wisdom, and so you can generally apply that if there's a habitual problem in the other way or whatever. It's not locking you into only these words or something. But my point is that not to take it overboard and be like, well, I can disqualify anybody I want now, because literally everybody's guilty of that. And it's like, well, no, that's not really the point.
Now, like theologically, having a one woman man as a now we just said like the an episcotos is going to be a protector. So we have someone who's going to protect, who's also a one woman man. Ultimately, they are representing something to the people, right?
Yeah.
And
Father,
why is it, huh?
The father, right?
The father, right? So why is it important? Why is it important to be a one woman man theologically? Why would
You have
Christ be concerned about that?
Christ and the church. I mean,
Yeah.
Christ is wedded to the church, and so I think that would also be a picture of this.
Well, and ethically, if you're a father, then all the other women who are not your wife should be either sister or daughter, and that makes them not prey, right? You don't prey on them. You're not trying to get them. Your motive with them is that they are joined to their husbands and they love their husbands more than anybody else, and committed to, that's your goal with them, is that you see them committed to godliness, not trying to get them. You have a lot of guys who they get in ministry, and the ministry is now open ground for them to prey on all the women. And it's like, that's the type of guy that this is saying, no way, he's not qualified. Okay, so sober-minded. And the next one's kind of similar, self-controlled. I mean, a lot of these kind of play off of one another, right? So what does it mean to be sober-minded?
Your emotions are not easily manipulated.
Yeah, you're thoughtful. You have control of your senses. Like you said, your emotions are not taking over, or they're not driving what you're saying or how you're acting or any of that. You're not a sensuous person. You're not drunk on the emotions.
Yeah, I think anyone who's been drunk can think about how belligerent you are in that state and how easily swayed you are, and especially into giving into temptation when you are in a drunken state. You can be in a drunken state without having any alcohol, and if that drunken state persists, then you are going to fall prey to all sorts of temptations.
Yeah. And to be real clear, this is not talking about being conveying emotion, because the spirit conveys emotion and people are like, oh, those people are drunk. But when you're conveying emotion in the spirit, you're under control of the spirit, and you're speaking, rational things of the word of God, and you're edifying people with it, convicting people with it. This is talking about being irrational, essentially, in what you're saying or what you're doing, because you don't have control of yourself. And that feeds into the next thing, which is self-control. You are to have control over yourself. If you don't have discipline and control over yourself, then telling other people to have discipline and control is just hypocritical. And so you're to actually have that in your own life if you're to be qualified. And then that goes into everything. Then are you excessive, as we go along here? Are you excessive with alcohol? Are you excessive with, we just talked about, are you excessive with women? Are you excessive with money? Are you just, any of those vices are you given to? If you are, then maybe you're not qualified. Now, again, does everyone have like a blurb to where, they have those? Yeah. But the point is is that a characteristic of this person?
I think it's important to note too that these qualifications are like even the husband or one woman man idea, even though that's an outward visible sign, these are all internal, in I guess internal states, right? So these are all things in the heart and the mind that are either stable or unstable that lead to the outward representation of those truths, right? So like
Yeah.
What I mean is, like, you don't notice, like, well, he needs to have, well clothed or something like that, right? It's not like focused on outward things. It's focused on inward things that would manifest outwardly. So it starts like inside and then flows to what would happen if someone wasn't sober minded. Well, visibly, they're going to be an emotional wreck. If they can't deal with lust, they're not going to be a one woman man. Like it's just emphasize, because a lot of people, when they're looking at qualifications, it is, well, they have a nice house or they're good at business. They're successful. Right. It's not looking internally as Paul is, where Paul is starting out.
Well, that feeds into the very next term, which this is where I think the translations start going really awry. I don't know what your translations say, but most translations are respectable, and or admirable or something of that nature. That is not.
You're talking about cosmion?
Yeah, cosmion. So, now you can look over at the lexicon over here, and those are options for you.
Being appropriate for winning approval?
Right. So is that really the idea? I mean, is he a politician?
Be a politician.
Here's what it really is. This is actually the common word group for modesty.
Yeah, ordered.
And this is almost never talked about, but modesty for men and modesty in the Bible, when we use the word modesty, we're not actually using it correctly. When we talk about women not like dressing in a way to where we can see them naked, that's not really what the Bible means by modesty. That's what the Bible means by don't uncover your nakedness, like you're participating in the sexual act, like cover up. But modesty typically, if you notice, is associated with rich apparel. It's actually flaunting riches. It's actually getting worth from the way that you dress, showing that you actually are well off or wealthy. So you dress in a way with clothing that is sharp, clothing that people are gonna be like, wow, nice. That's a nice suit you got on there. That's some nice clothing you've got there. I bet that cost a pretty penny. Like it's that sort of thing. It's the car you drive. It's the suit you wear. It's the house that you get, that it's like it's the mansion or whatever it may be. And ironically, people might be like, oh, respectable. That means that, yeah, you're respectable in the world's eyes. And it's like, no, this is saying the exact opposite. It's saying you need to be modest, which means that you actually. So let me give you an example. In Nicaea, a lot of people don't realize one of the things said at Nicaea is that the clergy are not to wear any sort of expensive clothing because they're to be modest. And if you look, the way that guys flirt with women, if they don't have looks, is typically money.
Yeah, they rev their car engines as they drive by.
Right, exactly. Also because it's cool to do that. But
because it's really obnoxious.
I got to tell you, that's not for girls, though. It really is because guys think it's cool. It has nothing to do with girls. But it does actually, like, there is a way for guys to flaunt money and like, look how rich I am, wearing all this jewelry, and I've got, all this clothing. I'm coming out of my Maserati or not Maserati, your Bugatti.
The Maserati's a nice car.
It is, but it's not. I mean, that would be considered on the low end if you're watching YouTube videos from some of these guys.
Which I'm not, so.
But it's that idea of trying to get people to respect you by your looks rather than by your character. And Paul's saying that guy, nope, that's a worldly mindset. He doesn't belong in the ministry. He's not qualified.
I guess we should probably just note that you're not saying that as a Christian, you can't have nice things, but you shouldn't flaunt those things.
Yeah, you shouldn't try to be gaining respect through those things.
Yeah.
That's what immodesty is.
Right, because
it's trying to get attention through those things.
Chrysostom was very wealthy, and he would use his wealth to be the next term, which would be hospitable, right?
Yeah. Well, he had a golden tongue.
Right. Yeah, he wouldn't flaunt it. He used it for kingdom building. So
yeah,
which is why I think like another like in the semantic domain of Cosmia, like ordering the thought of what you have in the proper way, what it's intended to be used for.
Right. Yeah, and one of them is appropriate, right? So you're actually like, you're appropriate with the things that you own. You're not trying to get respect through them. I don't know if you guys have watched like, do you guys know who Andrew Wilson is?
No.
Okay, he's like an Orthodox guy online, but he actually has a really foul mouth I don't care for. But he was on this panel of the red pill guys, what it means to be a man and all.
Oh yeah.
And most of them were all about material wealth and flaunting it. And of course, as the Christian, he's like, well, I don't think that true being a man has anything to do with, how much money you have or how buff you are, but it's actually about family and being a father and participating in that. And he got yelled at. I mean, just absolutely, I would say even threatened by some of these guys who are just a bunch of roided out thugs who think that, who basically he was disrespecting them because he was saying that all that they put their respect in is not respectable. And that's true. That's what Paul's trying to say here. It should not be a man who thinks his respect comes from the stuff he has or how buff he is or whatever, but it actually comes from his character. This is another one that's not really understood, philoxenon. It's hospitality. People often think hospitality means that you have your friends over and you serve them and all that, and it's like that's not what it's talking about.
Well, it's talking about brother, right?
Well, yeah, it's literally it's if you were to chop it up, it means love of stranger.
Yeah.
And it typically is referring to missionaries from another church that you are lodging. So you're actually taking care of them because in most cultures, if they're out in the open, they could be robbed, murdered, raped, whatever, and you're actually bringing them into your home to make sure that they're safe. So you're actually protecting their lives that way. You're feeding them, offering them shower, washing their feet. That's another terminology because you're washing off the dust of their feet means you're serving them and they're in need. And I think most pastors I know, frankly, even the pastors I think are disqualified, probably are not disqualified from this one because I think everyone has done this. Like I've had missionaries in my home. I've had Christians who were strangers lodging them or whatever. Most pastors I know have. It's not really a hard one to be qualified by because as long as you have the opportunity and you do it, then I think you're good. It's not typically talking about strangers as in people that are not verified to be Christians. It's not just some guy, showing up on your doorstep. Typically missionaries had letters from their church and they would say, hey, yeah, we're bona fide Christians. We're not here to kill you or anything. And then you would lodge them based on the word of that church.
I'm thinking of 3 John. What's the elder's name?
Yep. I forget the elder's name, but he uses this word.
Yep.
And he commends them for taking care of these guys that were sent out from the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is more of especially in their context, this is more of a life-preserving action than hey, come over and let's have barbecue.
Yeah, let's have some fun. It's like, pagans do that, but this is actually preserving Christian missionaries so they can continue to do the work of Christ in it. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't serve other Christians. I'm just saying that this is not what this term is talking about.
Yeah.
Now,
this is a tough one.
Yeah, actually, it's not if you do a word search. But if you just go off translations, then it is. So didacticon just means teaching, instructing. So the person is teaching or instructing, meaning they're able to teach or instruct. it doesn't mean, as some translations translate it, skillful teaching. It's like, where is that coming from? That's nowhere. It's not in the, as you look it up, it's not a common word. It's only used a couple times in the New Testament. Philo uses it like 5 times, and I think that's pretty much it. But every time he uses it, it's very clear. It's instruction, it's teaching. It's not talking about how you teach or whether you're persuasive or whether you're interesting to listen to. It's talking about the act of instructing. You're able to do the act of instructing people, and obviously in the Word of God, if you take the rest of the context of Timothy into consideration.
I mean,
so
Paul killed the guy.
Is. What is it?
Paul killed the guy.
Paul
teaching. Yeah, he fell asleep and fell out the window.
Oh, yeah. Right, exactly.
I mean,
yeah, I was like, wait a minute, what?
I
was like, no,
so his teaching wasn't holding a crowd, although it was probably like hours and hours of teaching. But
or this guy was just a bad listener.
Well, that's also because they met it on Saturday night and instead of Sunday morning. But
so that's a whole other conversation. The pastor is not there to entertain you.
Exactly. He's an instructor. That's it. That's his qualification. And so as long as he's able to instruct, that's the qualification there. So not, and this is an interesting word because it's par oinos is the word for wine. Par is the preposition para, which means it has the idea of a relationship with. So literally, if you were to take it literally on the etymology, not that you should always do that, but literally he's got too much of a relationship with wine, too much of a relationship with alcohol. And
it's been a while since I've done Greek, so this could totally be wrong, but is that the par is also like an under, could be like an under?
So under tends to be huper.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Para tends to be kind of something that's parallel to or in relationship with something. It really is referring to someone who has gotten drunk. Now, again, I think this is really important. Drunkenness is associated with the devil and demonic activity. And I would say that one of the things that disappointed me as I looked at different videos today on YouTube and prominent pastors like, Piper or MacArthur or Doug Wilson or all these guys. And when talking about disqualifications, everything seemed to center around adultery. As though that was the only thing that disqualifies you. And I would say that if you have someone gets drunk even once, as you're looking at them to be a pastor or as a pastor, they're disqualified. That is that they have partaken in demonic activity, which shows, look, these qualifications are supposed to show that you have wisdom as a mature Christian. If you can't even not discern even your own body so that you slip over into drunkenness, you can't even say, hey, I shouldn't even get close to it. You should not be a pastor. You should not be an elder. So drunkenness to me disqualifies someone. And I would say in the same way that adultery does. Doesn't need to be multiple times. It's an egregious sin that would disqualify.
Well, and that might be a podcast that we want to do for another time is, what is drunkenness and is it ever okay for Christians to participate in that? Because I've had conversations with Christians who think it's okay to reach a certain level of drunkenness.
Right.
But, just not blackout.
Well, one of the problems too is that we have liquor today and people don't realize like strong drink in the Bible is not liquor.
Yeah.
Strong drink in the Bible is wine that has not been diluted in any way. So wine is the strong drink that the Bible says pretty much never have this unless it's on a holy day and only on that day. And it's still not telling you can get drunk. So it's actually just regulating to like one day that you can actually have strong drink. But really strong drink, as Proverbs says, is for the dying. or for the poor to forget his worries, that sort of thing. In
other words,
like
it's medicinal. It's not 80 proof.
Right.
It's not
right. It's literally, it's really not for you to be drinking as some sort of like recreation. That's like regular wine that's been watered down. Now we have our strong drink is liquor, which is way past wine.
Mm-hmm. It's like paint thinner.
Right. And so people think, oh, well, hey, this is allowed because I'm getting closer and closer to the line, but I'm not quite there. And it's like, no, you're probably in a state that is drunkenness according to the Bible, but you're not so sloppy drunk yet that you think you're okay. But this is talking about, look, you're not even to have your mind compromised in any way. Again, you're to be sober minded. You're to be self-controlled. How is that consistent with being under heavy influence of wine or alcohol? It's not. Not a bully. So this is an interesting one. Because you can misunderstand this easily, right? Because you could actually look at the prophets and be like, oh, they seem like they're bullies. So they're telling people they're wrong. They're yelling at people. Here, let's actually not a pugnacious person. I love these like ancient. It's like, thanks. That really just clears everything up.
I think of a bully as someone who pushes around his own weight for his own benefit.
Yes. So a bully is someone who wants things that he wants. He's not talking about getting what God wants. You should be a bully for God. You should actually insist that God get his way and that people don't get their ways. This is talking about the bully gets what he wants. If you think of it this way, like there are people who you have to walk on eggshells around. The reason why we use those terms is because those people, they'll just they'll get really easily offended. And this is kind of described by another term that's coming up as well. But there are people who basically like they emotionally bully you to get what they want, right? It's not always physical. Now, I know a pastor who I've witnessed get up and threaten someone to actually like say, hey, we're going to have a problem between you, like a physical problem, because he was afraid that guy was going to disclose some information about all sorts of sin that this family was in and this pastor's family was in. Basically threatened the guy. So you can bully that way, but you can also bully emotionally to where people just don't want to upset you. And you see this in like, kind of like with women who want to dominate the household, right? They can bully you in emotional ways so that you just give them what they want. That's what this is talking about. And this is saying, again, that type of person has no business being in the ministry. They're not qualified.
Well, Mark Driscoll comes to mind here. So one of his primary disqualifying things that he did was this, right? I mean, he was. And
I don't know the situation. I never listened to that podcast. So maybe he was a bully, maybe he wasn't. I don't know if he was talking about things of God or if it was just a matter of getting things that he wanted. I think the claim was it was the latter, right?
Yeah, the accusations were he would bully people to do what he wanted to do, and
yeah,
his book, the book stuff that happened was, his primary issue there. But
yeah, the plagiarism and all that.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that a lot of these have to do with selfishness. Like a lot of them have to do with getting what you want. Like even when it talks about, we can go down there, but a lot of them talk about a guy who wants to get something for himself. Either he wants to get his way, again, not God's way, but he wants to get his way, or he wants to get money, or he wants to get access to people's stuff, or he looks at
or he wants to be liked.
Right. He wants to be liked. He gets personal benefit from that. He wants position or power, whatever it may be. He's looking for personal benefit for himself. And he looks at the ministry as an opportunity to do that. And Paul's like, that guy is the exact guy that should not be in ministry. He's not qualified. So here we go. Not insisting on every right or letter of the law or custom, meaning he's he's not just trying to get his own way. He doesn't have like, his idea of what everything should be, his idea of what everything should look like. He's not trying to get his own way with the ministry. Again, I feel like I've stressed this. He's trying to get God's way, but when it comes to things that are not God's way, let's say things you have freedom in, these types of people still want their way in those things. Here's another one, right? So gentle, you're not harsh in the way you speak. Like that's not what this means. Like even here, peaceable, it needs to be understood. So the macos and the mac type root is talking about fighting and making war, like physical fighting. And so amakos is the negation of that, meaning that he's not to be someone who's a brawler. He's not to be someone who gets in physical fights. He's not someone who starts fights, that sort of thing. That sort of person, again, has no control of themselves. They're not the type of man that should be a father. And so he's not qualified. So that's what it means. It means to be physically gentle, if you want to put it that way. Not a lover of money. Literally, it should be translated. So everybody thinks like you're rolling around in dough or something, right? Like you're rolling around in like dollar bills or something. But in reality, it means someone who is not looking to be discontent with what they have, so they always need luxury. Like it's a lover of luxury. It's someone who needs a better house, a better car, better clothes. That sort of person, again, is not content with what God may give them. And so they're going to always see, they're going to be pursuing something that is worldly, which is, I want to find my happiness in the luxury of life. And that person just is not mature. That's an immature understanding of life. Like these guys I was talking about before, they find their worth and their happiness in luxury. And it's like, well, that's worldly. It's not really of God to do that. It's not wrong to have luxurious things, but it is wrong to love luxury and not be content with whatever you have. And that will lead to a bunch of other things. It'll lead to you actually using people, right? So you're going to use people because you can get money out of them. You can get, you can use their houses. You can use their cars. You can use their stuff. Literally, this is actually what lording it over people means. It doesn't mean you're harsh or anything. It actually means you're using your position of power to get control of them and subjugate them in such a way so that basically you dominate them and you get their stuff. Have you ever seen, there was an Apple series called The Shrink Next Door?
No.
It's with Will Ferrell and the guy who played Ant-Man. I always forget his name.
Paul Rudd.
Yeah, Paul Rudd. It's about a guy who basically has all these mental problems. He goes to see a shrink, and over the course of 3 decades, this guy at first looks like he's really helping him. They become really good friends. He's a really good politician. He's a really good people person. And slowly this psychiatrist takes over this guy's life. He takes over like his money, his business, his house in the Hamptons, like all this stuff. And it just shows like this is what lording over means. This is what a lover of luxury will do. Because they're not a lover of people. You can't be a lover of people and a lover of God. Just as Jesus says, you can't be, God cannot be your Lord and money at the same time. You have to choose one or the other. So here's a major one that's misunderstood, right? And notice you're not given one word here. If anything is said, this is even over a one-man woman. This has more words in it than anything else. Which in literature, that means your eyes should go to it more than anything else. And it almost means that it's highlighted more than anything else. All right. So He is to be the leader of his own household, and he's to rule it well. And then we're told how. What does it mean to rule well? Having children in submission, with all dignity, so he's not abusing them to make them look good. But if one does not know how to lead his own house, how is he able to care for the church of God? And so I think this is really important because there's a parallel in Titus, of course, that we'll go over. And yikes, I don't even know if we're gonna have time for it, but because again, we really could spend all the time on like one of these. But there's a parallel that the children are not to be charged with any sort of like debauchery, dissipation, I think is what one of the words is for it. Essentially, it means they're not to be people who are unruly in terms of their sin. Because if you don't deal with it in your household, that sin, by either putting it out or putting that person out, cutting off fellowship from them, putting them on church discipline, then you don't belong in the church of God. Now, this is really important. This is talking about people in your household. You can do nothing about children who leave your house. That's it. Now, you can have a relationship with them or not, and you should cut that relationship off if they're in sin and they're put up on charges and all that sort of thing. But you need to bring it to the church in that regard. But it's talking about children who are either they're drunkards, they're going around sleeping around. In other words, they're like partiers. And rather than be in submission to the household, the father of the household as leader, they're just continuing to do that stuff. Think of like Eli and his sons. It's that sort of thing. It's not talking about your little kids are running around and they're not listening because they're loud and excited because they're playing with each other. That's not what this is talking about. It's not talking about one of your kids rebelling and leaving your household. People rebel against the church and leave it all the time. That has nothing to do with whether you're a good pastor or not. And it has nothing to do with whether you're a good father or not if your kids leave the household in rebellion. It has to do with whether your kids in your household are in submission to you and therefore they're not in some sort of egregious sin. Again, if at any time in your ministry that happens and you do not deal with it appropriately, you are disqualified. And I would say you're disqualified, not unqualified, to where you can become qualified later. Because here's what happens. What happens is kids grow up and move out. And now no one can see whether you are qualified or not. And I liken it to this. It's like a woman who commits adultery on her husband. And she leaves her husband and marries that guy. She's in perpetual adultery. But then her husband dies. Is she still in adultery? Is she?
Oh, yeah, of course.
But you can't see it now.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So it doesn't matter whether you can see it then. You have to look back upon the sin and say, no, but you can see it here. And that's why this person is not the person who should rule the church of God. Because when they had the opportunity, when their kids were in the house and they were either drunkards or they were fornicators or adulterers, you did not stop it. You continued fellowship with those people. You actually participated by encouraging whatever it may have been. You are not qualified because those people were not cut off from your household. Your whole household was in adultery. Your whole household was drunk. Your whole household was in that state of fornication. That is an egregious sin committed either while you're being chosen for pastor or while you are a pastor, and you are disqualified, period.
Well, and I think what's interesting is like as I was going through and looking at the household management thing, because it is such a big part of this passage. And what I learned is that this was a really common subject in antiquity. It was something that was frequently talked about. And there was an entire document, a Socratic essay that was written that was all, I mean, pages and pages, all about household management. And when people have looked at that, there have been scholars who have likened it to, we actually think that it's talking explicitly about household management, but we think that the real application or the real purpose that the author had was to explain how someone should lead an army or the state. And so they had this direct understanding that what happens in the household actually is something that flows outward that indicates what is going to happen on a larger scale, which I just thought was an interesting comparison, because when you now see it here in this passage from antiquity and it's being applied to the church, hey, you need someone to be a good household manager, because that is going to directly impact how that person interacts with the church.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to note that one of the primary jobs of the episkopos, as making sure that everything goes according to the way it should go, is discipline. And that's what really we say teaching for didacon. I'm not going to say it right. I have to read it in order to say it correctly. Are you looking at it, Drake? It's up higher. Anyway.
Yeah, it's the Didacticon.
Yeah, thank you. It always reminds me of like a Decepticon. But we say teaching, but in reality, it's the word for instructing. And instructing includes discipline. And it's really important then to understand that what God wants from his pastors is people who are full-blown instructors. They're instructors by their character. They're instructors by the words that they teach. And so they have to be studying the word of God, as we'll see in a moment. And they're instructors by their discipline. And if they lack those, they're not qualified. And so I think it's really important to understand that this, if you do not run your household well in terms of having your children under such control that they're not sinning egregiously in your household, you are not qualified to be a father in the church, because you will father the church in the same way that you will father your household. You don't become a different father. You're the same father everywhere.
Yeah, and anyone who has been in the military knows what happens if there's no discipline and everything falls apart.
Well, I've seen people, look, when you have these types of fathers, people do whatever they want. They do what's right in their own eyes. And God doesn't want us to have a church of chaos. He wants to have a church of order. And so that leads us to having fathers that need to know how to order the household. Literally, the words here used to lead have to do with actually ordering things, the ability to order things under that authority.
But everyone loves Disney Dad.
Well, I know that's the problem, right? So the vast majority of pastors are not these prophets who actually are instructing and disciplining. They're politicians who are making people feel comfortable with them. And it's like, well, you can't have, again, you have to have one or the other. You're not going to get both.
What April was talking about with the document, I haven't read that. That's pretty interesting. But I mean, everything does kind of focus around the household. It's like the old covenant. There's pictures and shadows of what God is ultimately going to do. And if you want to know ultimately what a man's going to do or what he's about, you got to look at his family. And a pastor shouldn't be, like they shouldn't be nervous about that or scared about hiding what, like the whole Steven Anderson thing that's blowing up right now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's your example, a guy that hid a lot of things, right? Sin always is going to come out. Can't hide it. Nobody's surprised. That's why, because he ran his church the way he ran his home.
Right.
I don't even know what's happening, but I could guess because he's a rageaholic.
right. So like his family was under control, but not with dignity, right? So he was abusive.
Yeah.
You could watch any of his sermons and you would know that.
Yeah, his oldest children have all like kind of left the home, and they've said, yeah, we were all abused and we would like it to stop. And there's a lot of hiding. There's a lot of weird things that people do. And it's almost like that IFB, the Independent Fundamentalist Baptist, Bill Gothard, all that sort of like,
shiny happy people.
Yeah, spray your kids in the face so that they'll be presentable in appearance on the outside. Throw them in a cold bath and make them free. Like weird punishments.
They're degrading and dehumanizing punishments.
Yeah, like we spray my
you
dog
spray a cat in the face. You don't spray your kid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just really weird stuff that people think is good discipline. And the problem is that, yeah, it works in the moment, but even in your family, your point is to make disciples for Christ. So at the end of the day, your kids are just going to end up hating you and hating God that you represent because you abuse them. Now, and the kids are real clear to saying, like, we're not talking about spankings. We're not talking about just being talked to harshly. Like, I almost think that most people in our day, also because of the Disney dads, they think like being a regular man as a father is also too harsh. But we're talking about actual abuse to where you can do damage to your children permanently, or you can degrade them, and not just physically, but also permanent damage in terms of degrading them as subhuman or treating them like a dog or something. This is just ridiculous. So they've got to be under control with dignity. It's got to be a respectable way that you actually do it. And obviously this is respectable in the ancient Roman era, not respectable in, modern America when you don't even give spankings or whatever. But the opposite is also true. You've got to discipline, and you've got to sometimes be so harsh as to put people out of your household and cut off relationships with them if they're an egregious sin. And those who don't do that, again, don't belong in the ministry.
Yeah, it's you talk to famous people, right? And they're like, yeah, it's a curse being famous. I never knew what I was getting into. My life is under, scrutinized and da 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 da. And in one way, it's like, well, that's kind of what you chose. Like, that's what being famous is about. I don't know why you're surprised about it. And then same thing with like pastors. You are example. So if you're a father, that means you're an example. So it means everything you do is scrutinized, right? And it should be, not because you need to be kept tabs on, but because you're an example. So like your family should be open to being looked at.
Yeah.
So
but
like
the right way.
In the right way. Yeah.
So yeah, I want to make this caveat because I think this is really important. Paul is saying that when you rule your household well, he's not talking about how well your kids dress. He's not talking about how tidy things look in your house.
Yeah.
He's literally talking about whether your children are guilty of egregious sins and you as the leader of the household just let it go.
Yep. Yeah, the irony of that perspective is this entire section has been about qualifications of elders that have to do with inward character.
Right.
And now you're taking this and going, well, yeah, that's all about inward character. But now let's use external qualifications to apply to their children. Oh, your hair wasn't brushed
paint
today.
Does he choose when he paints his living room? I mean, really, if he's a good leader, he'll choose the right color. And it's like, it's people want to constantly, and this is true of all of us, right? People want to constantly replace God's list with their own.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why almost no one pays attention to these qualifications, but they'll make their own list. Do I like this guy? Does he make me laugh? Am I entertained by his sermons? Does he invite me over for dinner? And has he been over to my house? Like, it's like that. Is that the list? You're going to get a false prophet that way.
Yeah. And obviously, like, I think that's a really good caveat because that hits very close to home. But like, and obviously what we mean is that if my child needs to be disciplined in front of the congregation, like there's the opportunity to show how a household needs to be run properly.
Yeah.
And if Eli had done what he was supposed to do, all of Israel would have known the discipline that came down on his sons.
Yeah,
it would have been so.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is that people discipline differently in front of people than they do at home. And we have tried not to do that, which is why people think that like I'm too harsh, right? Because you're gonna see in front of you what you would see behind you.
Yeah.
Like I literally would take my kids by the arm and people would know they're getting a spanking. And sometimes there'd be people in the other room and I'd spank right in front of the people.
Yeah.
And that's just, now I'm not trying to embarrass the kid, so I will try to take them out. But if there's nowhere to go, I'm going to spank them in front of people.
Right.
And I'm going to speak harshly. This is another problem. I think that because of the Disney dad syndrome in our culture, people think harshness is abuse. And I think one of the big ways people fail with their kids is they do all the external things like spanking and all that sort of thing, but they don't speak with authority harshly. They don't mimic the wrath of God when their children sin. I think that you need to do that. You're representing God. You need to actually speak with authority and with anger, but anger under control, or at least mimic the anger in some way, even if you're not angry. I think that's where you get households then that you teach children that sin's not really that big of a deal. Your parents are just mechanically doing something they have to do, but they're not really mad about it.
Right.
I often cry in front of my children when I spank them.
Well, that's a good womanly way of doing it. That's the way women should do it.
Because I'm like, I don't want to spank you right now. Why are you making me do this?
Yeah, I don't think women should take upon a masculine role. I don't think their job is to be angry and frankly, I wouldn't want a woman to lose her self-control and all that. I think it's for the man who's more controlled of his emotions to regulate his emotions in such a way so as to use them for the purpose of communicating to the child the wrath of God upon sin. But I mean more in his tone, not physically. Yeah. Like I think your physicality should be the last thing you use. That's your capital punishment. And even then, it's like a couple spanks on the butt. That's it.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember too, for those who are seeking to be elders and whatnot and looking at future families and all, remember that you're raising inheritors of a kingdom, right? Not, as we would say, like you're dehumanizing. If you're doing dehumanizing things to your kids, like you're not raising pets, you're raising those that are going to inherit a kingdom.
Yeah, you're raising sons and daughters of God. You better be careful because they're his sons and daughters before they're yours.
Exactly. And
I don't mean temporally. I mean, like, in terms of position.
Right. And taking what Christ says about judging others in regards to giving them money, it'll be measured the same to you, how you'll be judged.
Yeah.
If you're disciplining your kids in a particular way, I guarantee you, the way God, when you need discipline by the Father, it might be in accordance with what you're doing.
Yeah.
And do you want to dish out? You better be ready to get what you're dishing out as well. So it better be biblical and it better be with the mind of Christ. Because I want to be, as Jeremiah says, don't judge me. What does he say? Don't judge me in judgment, but judge me as a child or something like that, right? So like, spank me, but be, like love me too. And
and I also want to say that notice this is about children. Now, I do think the man needs to run his household in terms of his wife as well, but he can put his wife out of his household if she's not in submission to him.
Right.
He doesn't. So there are people who believe that you physically
Stephen
discipline your wife.
Yeah.
The IFB, a lot of IFB guys believe it. Now, some don't believe it. It's not everybody, but like him, I think he does believe that. Nowhere in scripture do you physically discipline your wife. Discipline for your wife would be, you're not going to submit to me. You're choosing not to be married to me. You can leave the household. You are divorcing me. You're breaking the covenant. You can leave. That's discipline of the wife. and therefore you don't really have that here so much. And you have a warning by Peter saying, hey, if you deal too harshly with your wife, indicating physicality, because he actually says she's the weaker vessel, so that's physical, right? Talking about her body. That he says that if you actually, I would say he's saying if you hit your wife, God's not going to answer your prayers. You actually have incurred the wrath of God. He's going to turn away from you and give you over to the devil if you actually harm your wife. So there should be no physical sort of harm to your wife in disciplining her or otherwise. That is not your job to do. And so he doesn't mention it here, right? But run your household in a way to where your wife doesn't get to do whatever she wants, because then those sins are on you. You still need to put her out then if she's going to do that.
There is a book that I want to read. I haven't read it yet. I think it came out in the 80s. It's called The Intellectuals. I think the author's name was Paul Johnson, but his whole premise was that if we knew the lives and the characters of people like Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, then we would never listen to a word that they said. And I think that that's a good thing to remember when we are looking at qualifications, is that we should not believe or trust a word that an elder says when he is not qualified in his character.
Yeah, because ultimately, look, I mean, even the devil can read scripture, right? But he's going to twist it. So, like, I almost want to say to people, like, most pastors that I think are unqualified are probably going to speak to you truths that are going to kill you. And what I mean by that is some will lead you into heresy, and usually heretics are viewed, you'll see them by their character, false prophets. But false prophets also don't teach you the whole counsel of God. They only teach you certain parts that you're in agreement with, and they kill you slowly by not growing you. You check your boxes because you agree with what they say. What they say is not convicting. What they say is not transforming. It's void of the Spirit, but it's true.
Yeah.
And they can kill you that way. Most pastors I know who are unqualified, who are false prophets, kill you that way, not the other way. Now, they may do both. Eventually, I think they get to the heresy, but I think that's something to look out for. And the amount of superficiality in preaching in the American church should be alarming. It's not just that these guys are okay because what they're teaching isn't heresy. It's that they're actually false prophets, and they're only teaching some of the counsel of God and not all of it, so that you die anyway. Drake, any comments?
No, I think it's a good prayer to ask the Lord to protect our elders and protect us. We don't. I mean, I think most of us have been under churches that have been shepherded by unqualified elders and seen the damage of that, and we want to be in a church that is run by those with the Spirit and teaching truth, and not just true things, but truth with power. So it's just a good reminder to pray for your elders, because that's what Satan is trying to do, is disqualify them like every day.
Oh yeah.
So
well, that's why it's important to remember, like, your elders will sin, but it does matter what kind of sin.
Yeah.
And it does matter in whether it's a pattern or not. And so I think that's important. So your elders are going to sin. They're sinners like everyone else. Like, it reminds me of, so you guys probably don't remember this because you weren't alive, but when Jimmy Carter was running for president, or when he was president, I don't even remember. Yeah, exactly. Because he was a Christian.
Yeah.
He was like, and I've lusted after women. And at that point, his popularity just shot down. And I always thought it was fascinating, because I'm literally like, every single person on the planet has lusted after someone. Why is it suddenly that because he's seen as a sinner that he actually confessed it? Why is he suddenly lost all this respect? And I actually think that most people need to view their leaders as perfect. Yeah. Even though they say that they're not, they need to view them that way. So they belittle the sins that they commit, which frankly they shouldn't, when they're larger sins, or or they just I think just imagine that they're perfect and they never sin or whatever. But either way, you need to know that your pastors are sinners and they're saved by grace and they need mercy and grace as well. But that does not excuse them from egregious sin that disqualifies them. It's different to be forgiven and to be qualified. Most of the church is forgiven. I would say all of the real church is forgiven. Only a few are qualified to be elders. Mm-hmm. So that's the distinction. So don't think that they're perfect and then run like crazy all over the place, like the sky's falling if you see them sin and it's not a major sin or something. But also don't belittle the egregious sins they commit or a pattern of sin that you see. That means they're disqualified and they need to be removed.
Yeah, it's almost like with pastors, if you don't think your pastor sins, you're not spending enough time with them. Well, yeah. But I think the other part of it is when I look at our elders and I look at the lives that you both lead, if there is a sin that I see, I look at it more like, oh, that was out of character. That was something that was out of character. Not like that the goodness is the part that's out of character.
I was just joking, April. I don't actually sin, so I don't know what you're talking about.
When your elder sins, it should kind of be like, yeah, that was unexpected because they're normally here, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be like, oh, well, they're normally all over the place. Oh, he did something good today.
Right. Yeah. So the pattern should be good character. Yeah. The pattern should be good character, not bad character, and occasionally has good character. Everybody occasionally has good character when things are going well, right? Everybody's under control when you're giving them $1 million. Everybody's under control when they get what they want. Like that has nothing. Everybody's under control when they're not being tempted. I mean, it's what is the pattern?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's when you're in the wilderness.
And how egregious the sin is, because I think you only have to do something once when it comes to the more egregious sins.
All right. Well, I hope this was edifying. And hopefully you can be in a church that you're like, my elder doesn't meet any of these things. And that could be hard. Maybe quickly address if you're finding yourself in a church like that doesn't meet any of these. And, what do they do? Do they just leave? Do they call the elders out for it? Do they do both? Look for a new church.
Well, that feeds into what I was going to say. So I actually think the way that you worded that there, and I know you didn't mean to word this, but this is how we think about it, is that actually it should be not if they don't meet any of these, if they don't meet one of them, they're not qualified. Too many times people think this is a list to choose from. And as long as he's qualified, in most of these or the ones I think are important, then I'll go. Again, that's making your own list.
Yeah.
This is the list we're given. Titus is the list we're given. 1 Peter 5 is the list we're given. These are the things we're given that show maturity. And if they lack these things, again, as a pattern or in an egregious way where they sin and break these things, they're not qualified in any of them. And so what I would want to say to the person is, if you're in a church and your pastor fails in one of these areas to where it's a pattern or it's an egregious failing of these things, and by egregious sin, I really mean a sin that would be like guilty of death. So like, I think again,
when Steve Lawson's.
Right. And so like adultery or like I mentioned drunkenness, because I think drunkenness is close to inviting demons in, like witchcraft. So it's the death penalty. Those sorts of things are egregious. Not having self-control at every moment. Yeah. Is that a pattern? but it's possible for you to have self-control at one time, or I get it. So it depends on whether it's a pattern or it's, an egregious sin. But if you're in a church where he doesn't meet those in terms of the pattern or the egregious sin, you need to find a different church. And I guarantee, if you pay attention to this list, your list of churches is going to get really, really small. And maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's good. On that note, yeah, pray for your elders. I hope this was helpful, edifying. Again, we're here to help you discern, help you think like Christ, and take the Word of God seriously. If you want to support us in this ministry, we have a Patreon link. There it is, right there. Come and join us. We post things early. You can watch these like a week before. And we also do a lot of book reviews, movie reviews, more lighter stuff on there. So you can come and have fun with us, watch us eat donuts, and watch Rings of Power. At least one episode. We had a good time. So.
That was more than enough. Just one.
That was more. I haven't even. I think
I watched all the other ones, but
I think I watched like 2, and that was it. I just couldn't bring myself to waste my.
I watched the rest, but it was it's not worth it.
I watched people make fun
of it.
Orc
baby.
Work baby. I just want to take care of my work baby. If you want to not take care of your work baby, join us on Patreon, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Bye.
Bye.
Haven't read the series, might not understand what would need to happen.
Have you read all of them?
I've read all of Frank Herbert's novels. Yes.
Oh, you've read all of them. I've only read the first one because my grandma told me that the other ones were bad.
Let me just start with this. Frank Herbert is not a good storyteller. Not a good storyteller. He's a fantastic world builder.
Harry and I, we're pals. Harry and I were
Harry and the Hendersons.
You grew up at Hogwarts?
The first book came out. Harry and I were around the same age, and so I grew up with books. Like the last book came out when I was 19, and Harry was around 19. This, I went to a Christian high school, so this was a big deal. It was a big thing. Harry Potter is evil, and you can't be reading this or participating in this.
The reason why I like Moby Dick so much is, to me, there's a parallel with Genesis. So it's actually history. It's history that Melville he's interviewed. This actually occurred to a bunch of whalers.
Yeah.
And the survivors he interviewed.
Yeah.
And it became this book. But notice how he's writing this history. It's not, here's all the facts that happened. All right, the end. He's writing it because he wants to put meaning and a message to what has occurred.